Welcome to this explainer of the surreal, deeply philosophical text, The 5 Stages of God's Absence. Today we're walking right into a massive, incredibly high-stakes thought experiment. If you've ever found yourself questioning the fundamental structure of reality, or your actual place in it, you're absolutely going to love how brilliantly this text breaks things down. It literally takes abstract concepts and turns them into living, breathing, arguing characters, giving us a front-row seat to the ultimate collapse of absolute meaning. Let's get right into it.
We open with a seriously dramatic realization. Picture this: out of a freezing, howling blizzard steps the great Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, and he's carrying this heavy, terrifying declaration: God is dead because we murdered him. To really grasp the stakes here, we have to lean in to the premise. We are in a freezing, timeless, purgatorial tavern called Surreal, located somewhere at the literal end of the world. And Dostoevsky isn't just physically cold, he is completely burdened by the knowledge that the divine structure of the universe didn't just slowly fade away, it was actively dismantled by humanity.
So they're trapped in what we call the void. By definition, the void is this condition of radical freedom that happens right after the collapse of absolute meaning, moral structure, and divine certainty. I mean, think about it. For centuries, humanity operated with a cosmic referee, right? A strict set of divine rules and a guaranteed purpose. Well, in this freezing tavern, all of that is just gone. The floor of reality has completely dropped out. They aren't just solving a fun philosophical puzzle. They're dealing with a profound, terrifying reality where every single moral structure has collapsed into infinite empty space. How on earth do you live when there are literally no more rules?
Part 1. Trapped at the end. So how do brilliant minds react when they realize they're trapped at the end of everything? Let's meet the thinkers who arrive at this tavern to hash it out.
Here's your cheat sheet for the players in this drama. We've got 5 characters, and each one represents a totally distinct worldview, a totally different stage of processing God's absence. First, Dostoevsky arrives, just drowning in guilt and suffering, desperate for redemption. Then comes Friedrich Nietzsche, who is ready to celebrate our new power and autonomy. Next up is Albert Camus, offering pure defiance against the absurdity of it all. Then we have Jean-Paul Sartre, demanding radical action and responsibility. And finally, just sitting quietly in the corner, Emil Cioran, who brings absolutely nothing but cynical apathy. Think of him as the ultimate cosmic pessimist at the party. They're all staring into the exact same existential void, but they are seeing entirely different things.
Part 2. 5 Answers to the Void. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the text gets incredibly dynamic. We're going to rapidly contrast how these minds clash around the fire. We start with a massive clash right out of the gate: guilt versus freedom. Take Dostoevsky, for example. He is mourning. He views the void as a profound tragedy. He desperately wants that lost father figure back, and he fully believes that without divine law, humanity is just going to devolve into clever monsters with axes, basically justifying any horror imaginable. But then you've got Sartre, who completely rejects all of that guilt. For Sartre, this void, it's an incredible opportunity. Sure, realizing you're entirely responsible for your own life causes a kind of existential nausea, but he demands that we take this radical freedom and turn it into a committed project. Sartre says we are condemned to be free, and we just have to step up and own it, no matter how heavy it feels.
Then we have this incredible clash of egos about how to actually move forward. Nietzsche's all in on becoming the dancing Superman. He thinks we need to celebrate the empty throne, become the creators of our own absolute values, and live dangerously and experimentally. But Camus, he's having none of it. He thinks Nietzsche's Superman is just a dangerous fantasy that's going to end in tyranny and delusion. Instead, Camus argues for the honest, quiet dignity of Sisyphus, pushing the boulder up the hill. Think about the modern daily grind: waking up, doing the same tasks, commuting to the same job. Camus is saying we have to find joy not in pretending we're gods, but in the simple, absurd repetition of living and working, without any false hope of ultimate salvation.
But wait, we have a 5th perspective, just hanging out in the darkest corner of the room. Emil Cioran. While everyone else is screaming about meaning and guilt and revolution, Cioran brings absolute apathy. He points out a truly terrifying possibility. What if meaninglessness demands absolutely zero from us? What if trying to fix the universe is the actual joke? So he chooses to just sit back, smoke, rot beautifully, and watch the others completely exhaust themselves trying to solve a problem that inherently doesn't have a solution.
Part 3. The metafiction twist. Just as these philosophers are locked in a total deadlock, the narrative arc completely shifts. Let's look at the twist.
So, they're arguing, right? And suddenly they hear footsteps from the ceiling, a ceiling that definitely shouldn't exist in a one-story tavern. Slowly, horrifically, the characters realize they aren't historical figures at all. They're constructs. They're trapped in a novel. Think about that for a second. What actually happens when you realize you're just ink? It is entirely disorienting. They're confronting an invisible author listening from above, realizing they were created simply to argue about the death of God because the author themselves has absolutely no idea what the answer is. It's a philosophical thought experiment waking up to its own tragic fictionality.
And what's really fascinating here is the author's confession. The voice from above admits to the characters, I am writing this in real time. I am discovering it as you are. The creator is just as lost as the creations. Instantly, the whole story flips from this abstract philosophical debate into a desperately human struggle to just find an ending. The author literally created these 5 brilliant minds, hoping they'd miraculously solve the modern existential crisis. But instead, they're all just stuck in a tavern together, waiting for a punchline that isn't coming.
Part 4, the ultimate choice. To force an ending and break this stalemate, the author decides to step back entirely.
The floor of the void literally cracks open, and the characters are thrust into the Garden of Eden by a serpent, faced with a final, binary decision. This is the ultimate ultimatum to test their philosophies. Option 1, return to the garden. This is comfortable illusion. It's a return to innocence, warmth, and divine certainty. But it's also a cage where you surrender your freedom. Option 2, the wilderness. This is terrifying, infinite, cold, dark space. But it represents absolute freedom, where you have to build your own meaning entirely from scratch. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where everyone lands when the chips are down. It's super revealing. Dostoevsky goes straight to the garden, weeping, because he so desperately desires that father figure and a structured world. But surprisingly, Camus also chooses the garden. He admits he's just too exhausted by the absurd and just wants a break from pushing that boulder. On the flip side, Nietzsche and Sartre march right into the terrifying wilderness because they absolutely demand autonomy and a project to build. And Cioran, true to form, he flat out refuses to choose either, preferring to just slip into the void between worlds.
The resulting realities are pretty striking, actually. Out in the dark, freezing wilderness, Nietzsche quickly figures out that his powerful Superman persona cannot actually survive alone. So he and Sartre have to start building a crude shelter together. They learn the hard way that radical freedom actually requires community and solidarity to survive. Meanwhile, Dostoevsky and Camus get their peaceful garden, but they quickly realize it's a completely sterile illusion. The walls literally begin to close in on them, proving that a comfortable illusion inevitably becomes a suffocating prison that just crushes the human spirit.
Part 5, an honest, unfinished ending. Let's move to the final sequence and see how this all wraps up, or, well, doesn't wrap up.
Cioran, who basically tell out of the story entirely, ends up back in the original tavern, sitting across a table from the author themselves. And the crucial takeaway comes directly from him. He looks at the author and says, "The crisis is that there is no resolution. You cannot resolve the irresolutable. You can only acknowledge it." He's basically telling the author to stop trying to force a neat, happy ending. The profound realization here is that the lack of an answer is the answer. You can't magically resolve the death of absolute meaning. Living the condition, struggling with it honestly, day in and day out, without illusions, that is the only authentic conclusion we really have.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this whole text. The story ends not with some neat philosophical solution, but with the struggle itself. Out in the wilderness, Sartre and Nietzsche are hammering together a shelter in the dark, relying on each other. In the garden, Camus and Dostoevsky are talking as the walls shrink around them. The sheer act of writing, of thinking, of building something, even when you know it might be totally futile, is this beautiful, stubborn refusal to stay still in the ruins. Ultimately, that struggle is the closest thing humanity has to meaning.
So now it's your turn to step into the experiment. If the floor of certainty dropped out completely beneath you today, which would you choose? The comfort and illusion of the garden, or the terrifying freedom of the wilderness? And if you do choose the wilderness, what are you going to build there? Think about that as you go about your day. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning everything.